Good morning, everyone. I'd like to introduce Mitchell Silber from the Community Security Initiative. Mitchell.
Thanks, Seth. Good morning, everyone. This week at Consultants Corner, we'll be closing out some of the discussion that we've been having in the last couple of weeks about doors and moving on to how to harden your windows. Our discussions today will be led again by Dov and Ilya, our experts on dealing with the procurement process and the grant process. And we'll be doing Q&A. Please put your questions in the chat, so we'll get to them as we go or towards the end. And last but not least, we don't know the exact date when the nonprofit security grant applications will become available, but please start doing all the prerequisite work for it. So signing up and getting your documents in order for that, because we do believe that's going to be coming in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and it'll be a tight timeline between the application being out and the submission deadline. But with that, let me turn it over. I think, Dov, you're first.
Well, thank you, Mitch. Welcome, everybody. For those of you, every week we're growing more and more, and we have a few more attendees. We like to do kind of a roll-up, but we've been going for a few months now, and we kind of continue to build on the information we do. So this week, to keep it a little more shorter, a little more condensed, we're going to kind of skip our first key point summary, but hopefully you're reading through that as you're waiting. Just remember, we don't speak for DHSCS. Make sure to always confirm your questions with the reps. All right, all webinars are recorded, and you can see it on our website, JCRC-NY.org/Consultants Corner. And please post your chats. Like we say every week, it's very important to hear your questions, and we want to get back to you. We ended off last week with a survey saying what's some of the stuff that potentially we could go a little bit more in depth or rehash or discuss a little bit more for you. Again, the best move, go to the website and see our YouTube recordings. You'll definitely get some more information there. But there were some questions about the RFP cover letter. What exactly, how do we do this? What does this include? What is it? Right? That's, I think, about half of the survey respondents last week. That's what we want to hear. It's really this 2-page document that you see on the screen. It's a high-level overview of the project. It's part of that bigger RFP, request for proposal package, that you should be sending out, right? We don't want to just send out a blind, hey, yeah, we got some money, tell us what we need. Like, this puts it in your court, describes who you are, what you're looking for, the budget if you decide to put that out there, your schedule, some of the core pieces that make this a legitimate professional product. And like we've been saying every week, beyond just spending the money, we want to spend it right. And we want to really increase and upgrade your security levels. And that's what every member of the CSI team, what Ilya and myself, what Dave and Mitch are really trying to support here. If you don't have this document yet, we really made it fillable for you. If you want to add this, it's not a requirement, but we believe it's a great starting point. Please email your CSI regional security manager who can provide it to you. Remember, this is part of that package, the request for proposal package. I think people maybe over the last few weeks, since it was so new, has become a little bit overwhelming, right? We care a lot about navigating the procurement rules. Very important. Don't ever forget those procurement rules. Again, see the earlier presentations we've done, the DHSCS presentations, but we're trying to enable you to develop this package that could really give you a good opportunity to put it out there what you want and get the right responses from good vendors and good companies out there. So what does that include? What is this RFP package, right? So we just mentioned that cover letter. Again, previous weeks, we went a little more in depth. That 2-page, very simple document. It's mostly done for you, but it lays it out. So provide your EHP if you did one for the nonprofit security grant program. That your EHP documents, you could also send some architectural renderings, diagrams of your facility so that the vendor knows what they're dealing with. Obviously, only share it once you're confident this is a legitimate vendor. Some organizations like to have locations sign an NDA. There's different ways to do it. We're not saying blast this out there perfectly, but it's a piece of this package so people know what you're looking for. And then a third document we've been talking about a lot is the instructions to bidders document. This starts getting a little more technical, but again, we've built it for you. You can kind of personalize it to your project per se, but it tells a vendor what it is. It really starts getting into the nitty-gritty, how you expect your bid to look. So you can compare, like we've been saying, apples to apples, oranges to oranges, and and then when your team is leveling the bid, you kind of know what you're looking at. It lays it more out in a format you're requesting. You could also include additional spec documentation. We put together some other specifications for some of the more technical categories. We're only in our first hardware category so far, right? That's how much rules that were out there and package instructions that we've been talking about. We've talked about doors for the last few weeks, but we've made these relevant specification documents for door hardening, glazing, but also for other categories. And if it's something you need, we can definitely supply it. But I think before you even get to that, that should be supplementation. You really should just kind of think about what it is you're asking for. All right, so that would make your whole package. Again, please see the previous weeks for more detailed documentation, more detailed discussion on these documents. So the next slide. What's the big deal? We've been talking about these requests for proposal documents, the technical cover letter, the bidder's sheet, etc. Why? Well, I have one example. This document that we're about to see is literally a document that we just received. This is a bid for a project I'm working on that was literally, I'm just decided to help a location out. And this is what they received very recently. Yeah, they broke out their price. It says access control, but let's look a little deeper. I have no idea what products, what brands, what specs, what their capabilities are. This is from a known New York City vendor, but hey, let's just try. We'll throw it out there. Would we buy a car? Someone said, hey, $30,000, we'll get you a car. Is it a new car? Is it a used car? What capabilities? All-wheel drive? It's really just a very hard way to look at your options and what's being provided to you to make a good decision. And honestly, if you saw a bid or a quote like this, I almost wouldn't even move forward. But we'll tell you this, we can almost guarantee you this. If you put together the RFP package like we've been talking the last few weeks, you won't see anything like this. This is just one example of, without us setting it up, each organization setting up the bid package appropriately, you're going to get something like this. And it's just very hard to move forward with. It's very hard to really know you're not getting taken advantage of and actually understanding what you're doing. So last week, we mentioned briefly, and very importantly, that whatever upgrades you do across the board, not just doors specifically, but that's somewhere where it's very blatant, very straightforward. Code comes first. There's been so many different products in the market as lockdown and active shooter became, common talk for these quick, easy solutions. But the fact is, most of these are not to code, right? We talked last week about single motion egress, right, for fire evacuation and other emergencies. So we just want to reiterate that again. As you design your door projects, as you do other projects, make sure you're following those rules. If you have a good, reputable vendor, this wouldn't be a problem across the board. So just keep that in mind, right? So these things that would take two motions, you have to undo this lock, do that. We want to be able to get out of that room with one simple motion that anyone can figure out. So just be mindful of some of these new products on the market. So this slide, like we mentioned last week, was actually provided by our friends at Securitech. And with that, I want to turn over the shared screen to Securitech to talk about a few products. There was a couple questions last week about Shabbos locks, and we're going to not get too deep into how to design that. I think we're going to save that for our access control discussions. But while we had them, we're very fortunate to have David Klein from Securitech show some products for the next few minutes. And then we'll be back to Ilya to close out our door section and get into the window hardening. So with that, I'll turn it over to David. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. So as they were talking about Shabbos locks, very simple. We have a few, I have a couple versions here. Everybody can see this. So we have a mechanical keypad and we have a regular lock that's on the door. So typically you come in, you put your code in and you get entrance. So this lever would release and that would release the main lever so you can get into the building. This particular version will marry up to anybody's exit device that you may already have for your exterior doors. And very simple, if you want to lock it out so no one can come in, you just press the key to the other side, and as you can see, the lever is locked and you can't get entrance. So during the week, you keep this locked out, and for Shabbat, you unlock the lever and you can easily gain entrance. Now, one of the issues you will have with a pin pad like this is, as we saw last week, your fingers will rub against the pin, and the paint may wear off. So you can, come up to the door and kind of figure out what the code is. So those are a couple of the things that can happen. Obviously, there's only 5 numbers, so if you have enough time, you may be able to figure out the code that way. But that's one of the reasons why we have the lockout feature. And the another thing we did is we created an electronic version to work with access control. So very simple. I can't gain entrance. I put the code in mechanically. I can't get entrance, but with your access control, the moment I activate the access control, I can release the lever and get into the shul. It's very simple. So this version would be tying into your existing access control, or we swap out the different type of head, and then this becomes completely mechanical. And of course, being completely mechanical doesn't violate any of the Shabbat rules and regulations for using a key or using electricity on Shabbos. And it's very simple. Again, going back to the code compliance, anything Securitech makes is strictly code compliant. Life safety is the utmost thing that we always have to consider on any of the products that we provide or create. We're kind of what you can call an end user based manufacturer. We will design a system to meet the needs of the specific end user because everybody's different. Again, as long as it meets all the requirements of local fire codes and life safety codes, we will build anything. So just wanted to keep it short and sweet. Didn't want to throw a lot of different information out. So basically, we have a mechanical version and electronic version of our Shabbos locks. So I thank you for your time. As you can see on the slide that they just shared, we have some on gates, we have some on front doors, and again, this particular version that you see are meant for buildings that already have maybe exit device on it, but we could also do it when it's lever to lever. So you may just have a lever on the interior side of the door. So we can retrofit pretty much almost any opening on the door for this. Again, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it.
Gotcha. Thank you, David, very much. I posted your email address online if some people have questions. The reason we wanted to share this, besides just the questions last week about how do we deal with the doors and hardening and electronic access control on Shabbos, right? And I'm definitely no rabbi, but the point being, like David was saying, was that there's ways to have both. All right. We're definitely, this is a group of people, all of us here on today's webinar are people who can, organizations included, that can come up with our solutions that can work with both worlds. And the real goal here is that it's not that, oh, we can't use electronic systems, let's just not have this. It's how do we ensure that the doors are secured and closed as much of the time as possible. And then because of Shabbos, obviously some of the options are not available. How do you shunt that? How do you turn off that electronic system into another way that still provides security? Obviously, you could also have security officers or volunteers screening that they would only open the door for the right people, but some people don't always have that option. One thing very importantly, before I turn it over to Ilya, and I'm sure he will add to it as well, is unfortunately, punch code cipher locks are probably some of your weakest options, unfortunately. Now, it's a great option to navigate our Shabbos question, but to use this as your go-to constant, the fact is, once 2 people have the code, everybody has the code. How is it secure if everyone can get through and that code gets passed on, is never changed? So there's, even if you do a system like this, there's other steps that you should include. Update the code that's used to open the punch code, and that should only be for a minimal few hours when you can't use the electronic systems, right? Maybe just during Shacharis on Shabbos, Mincha Marv, whatever it is, but it shouldn't be just 24 hours. The electronic system transfers to the manual system. Make those windows, make it work for you, but minimal time. And now we shorten that amount of time that doors are open. And if you do it right, it can be almost 24 hours, 7 days a week, that there's some sort of locking mechanism to an upgraded level than where we started. And with that, thank you again to David Klein and Securitech. With that, I will turn to Ilya. If he wants to add in a few more comments, we're going to close out some of our door hardening discussion and get into Windows. So thank you.
Thanks, Dov. And thank you so much, David. I had a friend who had a nickname, a walking encyclopedia, but I was just listening as David was presenting on the locks. I want everyone to remember that people like David are walking encyclopedias, because what did we talk about last time is that locking is extremely complicated. okay, for a layperson, right? So that's why I showed you the spec sheets last time, how, product catalogs that are far more difficult than a layperson could imagine. And so please leverage knowledge of people like David who work on these solutions day in, day out. And so I just learned a couple of new things myself. And David, thank you so much for stepping in and sharing with everyone. It's a rare opportunity. Without further ado, it's an easy transition. I mean, you could look at the two examples on the left and right here, and even for the simplest installations, okay, the typical instructions to us, let's say, or to yourselves in the community, or to a person who's never dealt with door hardware, locking hardware, right? Even these instructions could be very simple. And let's say for a residential installation, the one on the left, man, you probably can do it yourself if you know how to drill holes in doors and stuff like that. You can figure out the dimensions. You could look at that picture. It's, relatively simple. But then look at the right side. Okay. And on the right side, the lock itself, right, is not much more difficult. But please notice how many more details are provided just for installing a slightly more sophisticated lock. How many drill holes do you need to drill? How many individual assembly parts are there for this particular lock? So I want you to be aware that what Dov was referring to when he was presenting a previous slide where a contractor just said lock, for example, and the price, right? You don't know what you're buying. Okay, so you should be engaging with a knowledgeable individual who can walk you through how these things will function to help protect your facility and how they would need to be installed, right? It's no wonder that folks like David from Securitech spend so much time studying different technologies, studying different solutions, and then advising clients on these. So this is just an easy example for you to keep in mind. Now that we talked about the Shabbos lock, I showed you an example. Here is a very simple catch-all phrase that is typically used in normal specifications. And this, if nothing else, if you choose not to include a specification, right, or a full professionally prepared specification, this is at the minimum the language you should put in front of any contractor. Okay, and again, this is all being recorded. Some folks choose to take photos right with their smartphones. Okay, there is a lot said in the short sentence. I didn't come up with it, I promise you. Okay, I just took it from traditional specifications for door hardware that are being used. This is as unsophisticated as it gets, but it gets the point across. You're telling the contractor that they have to comply with standards. They have to be guided by manufacturer's requirements, and they also have to meet code, all in one sentence. So please remember that even though locking hardware is very sophisticated and complicated, your direction to contractors sometimes doesn't have to be. If you put that sentence in front of them, you're already holding their feet to the fire a little bit better than if you use no language to direct them. So to close off our discussion about door hardware, we always struggle to come up with simple language that is universally understood, okay? And again, we don't really want to overwhelm anyone or assume that anyone understands, professional technical terminology. So we decided, okay, so what should you be looking for as a client when you're thinking about, I guess, evaluating the quality of the products and this implementation that you're receiving from contractors? These are a few points you should be thinking about. Cleanliness and overall precision of installation. Okay, you will notice sometimes, and again, we can certainly provide a ton of photos, and we're actually assembling what we call a fail library where contractors don't do a good job. And I think we even showed you some photos where it's very easy to see that contractors were sloppy and they didn't think twice and they walked off without doing a good job. But basically, as a normal consumer, you should expect cleanliness and overall precision of installation. You should be looking at overall quality of workmanship. Okay, Did they drill the right holes? Do the holes match how you're putting in the lock? Or are they scratching their head all of a sudden in the middle of installation and saying, we probably didn't do this right, we got to redo that. As soon as you start hearing the words redo, right, that means you're probably, somebody made a mistake, right? And so how that comes out at the end is your ultimate goal. You want to make sure that the contractor, they bought scope from you, you're paying them money, right? Make sure you're getting the best quality, the best value for that money. One thing that comes up very often, and this is where we have more extensive conversations, is what is your desired functionality? For example, Dave just talked about, and Dov mentioned Shabbos lock, right? This is basically functionality. Okay, this is a bunch of our peers from the community are telling us that, hey, we need this functionality to work on Shabbos. So we need to instruct contractors later on. We need to understand how to do that and what products are out there that meet our needs. Those needs is how you state what functionality you want. So please, I always suggest for any team or any facility to sit down and just jot down a few key points of how you want these locks to work. Like without any technical terminology, without anything, just say, how do you want this to lock? How do you want us to unlock? Who will be the users? Just general consensus about functionality of the locks that you're selecting. Okay, that you can pass on to contractors and they should start giving you options. Just the same way as Securitech will offer you a bunch of different options for what it is that you're looking for. But if you say nothing, you're leaving the door open, both directly and as a figure of speech. You're leaving the door open for the contractors to take your hand and start telling you what they want to give you. So don't end up in a situation where someone is telling you what's convenient to be sold. It's very important to also manage handover for what's called beneficial use. A beneficial use is a common industry term, and I'm sure that it's used not only in the security field, but it's used in building maintenance, in anything that you procure that needs to be installed, right? Beneficial use is when a client begins using products that have been supplied to them, that have been furnished and installed, right? And so that period of handover, right? So for example, somebody says, okay, we're going to install 20 locks on your doors. You want to manage your expectations and you want the contractors to be aware of what expectations they should be meeting in order for you to take over as the client, in order for you to be satisfied that the project has been completed properly and that everything works to your liking. And so we'll spend more time in upcoming webinars talking about how to conduct final inspections before projects are completed or before vendors give you the letter of completion and ask for their final payment, right? Those things are very important. If you're simply dealing with locking, it's no different. Before you take over as a client, make sure that everything that you procured that was installed works to your liking. Warranty is a very important component. It's a little bit more general. It's outside of just locking. Warranty is issued for a variety of products, but it also extends to locking. So please understand what kind of warranty you're getting. Okay, is it going to be just for 1 year or is it a more extended period of time? And it's very important to know that in the specific aspects of warranty, because people and facilities lose significant amounts of money because they just simply don't know that actually their product is still covered by warranty. The same goes for the vehicle you drive, right? You would be very careful to assess what warranty conditions you have and when you can bring your car for service. The same here. You may have a 5-year warranty on a lock, and yet after the first year, you completely forgot about it, and you're inviting the contractor to charge you for a service that otherwise should be covered by a warranty. So please remember that. And extended maintenance is a big point for how you deal with any contractor, and particularly those that are installing locking hardware. You want to understand, do you want to purchase extended maintenance? What does that look like? What's the pricing for that? And what are the benefits? If it's not a good fit for you, that's fine. But please don't sign on a dotted line just because the contractor is sliding it across the table. Okay, we at JCRC, we like, working with the community and advising them to have extended maintenance, but sometimes it's not a good fit for purpose, or sometimes it's way too expensive. So you have to understand what your options are. Okay, don't sign on the dotted line. And just to sum this up in simple terms, okay, just like I would check my doors and door hardware at home when a contractor comes and installs it at my residence, right? I would want to do the same for my organization before I can approve completion of the project and payment of the final sum of money to the contractor. The things that you see in front of you are trivial. They don't require technical knowledge. Okay, it's just a keen eye for different types of simple red flags, if you will, or simple points of concern that you should be fully capable of identifying. So gaps, cracks in the symmetry of installation. Okay, some of the locks will stop working much more quickly if door hardware is asymmetrically installed, or if the door itself, or if the frame doesn't have the right symmetry, right? So those things you should be watching out for. The same goes for any noises that the hinges make or any other parts of the door make, especially when they rub against the frame. That's not the best, not ideal installation. Those are simple things to look for. If the locking hardware or the door itself appears to have poor operability, right? You don't want to get in a situation where the contractor is tapping you on the shoulder and saying to you, please sign, I'm about to leave, and you can't open a door, or you can't operate a lock, or they didn't even give you the key. I've seen instances where a contractor walks off the site and forgot to give keys to rightful users. The other thing that I notice often is, again, going back to the point of where the sides of the doors, they have a lot of scratch marks. That is very visible often on solid wood doors and hollow metal doors. Unfortunately, that again is a sign of poor installation. So these things that you see in front of you are very easy baseline steps you can undertake when you're dealing with contractors before you accept their work. Okay. Obviously, we welcome more questions. Please use the chat if you still have some questions about door hardware, but we're going to proceed to protection of windows and glass in general. We've said it multiple times that we completely respect the fact that aesthetics of a building, for the most part, 99% of buildings will feature some glass elements. In many cases, it's stained glass because of the aesthetic requirements of faith-based facilities, right? And there's a lot of questions about, we can't tell the architect, no, just make the walls and the roof. We don't need windows, right? No sane community would accept a facility like this. So we completely respect that. We can take glass protection and put it into two major categories. One side would be blast protection, and the other one would be bullet protection. They're not the same. We want to be very, very clear. This is not the same. And if you're combining the two and you're saying, well, it doesn't matter, I just do blast protection, and that means that it'll protect me from gunfire. It's not going to happen. It doesn't work that way. Okay. So, however, both or either would have an enhanced protection from forced entry. They both would offer that capability. However, when you talk specifically about protection from blast and gunfire, there are different applications. Okay, and you can see here just a couple of examples of what would be the blast protection. It's on the left, where fragmentation that occurs from a blast wave does not force fragments of glass to fly into occupants of the facility. It reduces both the chance of injury to people on the inside. It reduces the capability of attackers to enter the facility if that's one of their methods. And it basically, in general, protects the facility and its occupants. Bullet protection does a similar thing. However, it withstands gunfire rather than a blast wave. Both, if the windows and glass are reinforced to either level, both may offer, as I said, enhanced protection for forced entry. But again, each application is individual. We don't like, generalizing and saying, okay, all facilities need to have bullet protection. It may not be the right fit for purpose for you. Most facilities, however, do either blast protection And in addition, that blast protection also protects from the weather elements. Okay, so there is more merit, for example, to focus on blast protection film than on bullet resistance. And we understand that, but again, each application would be different. I just want you to be aware that there are two categories. It gets complicated. I don't want to overwhelm you with a lot of technical language here, but what you see in front of you, the picture or pictures, describe in general how a protective film is installed. Now, one thing and one thing only that we see very, very often, and where facilities spend tens of thousands of dollars and get zero protection. Now, I want to be clear, tens of thousands of dollars and zero enhanced protection is when the film is not anchored in the frame of the window. Or if the film, whatever installation is done, is installed on windows that are of inferior construction. Okay, it's no sense of protecting an inferior window that's falling apart with window film, because at the end of the day, that thing is flying anyway, and it's injuring somebody because that frame is not sturdy enough to hold it in place, right? So the idea here is to be aware of what kind of windows you have in place, and to have, to look in contractor's eyes and say, is this going to help me? Right? And do a little bit of your own research. As you will see on the right side, I included a small card that indicates what kinds of standards apply to to protected window glass panes, and also protected security frames, if you will, window frames. And the picture pretty much speaks for itself. It's a layered film, right? That's created, and it's made up of several layers of that would be applied as a single coat to the window pane. And the anchoring, as you see, it's called silicon seal. It's the black on the right photo. It's one of the methods of anchoring that film in the frame. If someone, and let's move on to the next, I'll explain a little bit more about the significant difference. And here we are. Notice how this gentleman is cutting the window film right across the glass pane. He's not doing anyone any service by doing this level of work, because he'll apply the film, but that film is not anchored to anything. So that small pane of glass, first of all, even the window is, it's questionable whether it's a sturdy window in the frame. However, even if we talk about that small piece of glass, right, you put the film on it, that's great. But once the blast wave hits it, it's detaching exactly at the edge between the glass and the window frame, and it's flying right into the occupants. It's done. Okay. So that level of installation is not optimal, and we certainly would caution you against using contractors who suggest that that's the way they will install it. We've seen too many conditions where, again, lots of money has been spent to no avail, and there's no enhanced protection. On the left-hand side, you'll see some of the key factors that we caution our community to just to look out for, either as contractors perform their work or after you've received product. Okay. Obviously, we're a large group today, and I just want to point out that there are additional options for achieving sensible levels of blast protection, particularly when we're discussing glass panes where the glass is not even, where it's not flat. That applies obviously to stained glass and so on. This is, for those that have not recognized it already, is called a blast curtain. It might on the photo look like a regular curtain, but it surely isn't, because it's anchored at the top and it's anchored at the bottom. And when the blast wave hits it, this curtain basically absorbs the fragments of glass that are flying into it, and it holds those fragments at a very close distance to the actual window opening, thereby reducing any chance of injury to occupants on the inside. That also achieves some level of blast protection. But again, applications are specific to each facility. In some cases, it's impossible to use this type of product, but I just want you to be aware that there are additional options other than film and bullet resistant applications. So Bullet resistance follows a very specific standard. It's set up by Underwriters Laboratories. It's numbered 752. Beyond that, you have a bit of a scheme here as to what UL levels of bullet resistance are out there in the market and how different products are designed to meet those standards. But if I start talking to you about velocities and the ranges at which these are tested and so on, it would require a much more lengthy conversation, and we'll have to throw a lot more terminology at you. However, these are the general levels of bullet resistance that exist out there, and there's a standard for it. When you're engaging with manufacturers and contractors, when you're implementing these things, that's what you should be looking for, okay? So, general rules. And this is an amalgamation of things where I started with protecting windows and glass, and includes both blast protection and bullet resistance. Once again, the best way is to engage with manufacturers because, like you saw with Securitech and various others, they have a wealth of knowledge about their own product and whatever other products there are on the market. They understand the engineering components, the installation components. They write specifications for installation, all the instructions, okay? And so they will help guide you when you have project needs. 7 mil thickness is a minimum for at least a couple of window film brands in order to achieve some level of blast protection. Okay, so there could be firms that are selling films that are a little bit thinner, but 7 mil thickness is what I have come across in my professional life when we were specifying applications for blast protection for window film. As I said before, it might appear to you as a very trivial matter, but if the film is not anchored in frame, you have wasted thousands of dollars because the security will not improve. I just want to be very clear about that. Okay, it's a simple task, but you will find that vendors are very happy to run away and just leave you with nice coat of film, not anchored in window frame, and that doesn't work, unfortunately. We wish it would, but it just doesn't work. There is a lot of conversation about levels of bullet resistance. Now, what I have seen, I'm not going to say I endorse this specific level, and that's a conversation you should have based on your individual application and needs. But level UL 752 level 2 has appeared in multiple discussions as one of the chosen levels for protecting, for achieving bullet resistance for different applications. I just want to be clear. Please don't decide on these things on your own. These are pretty technical things, and please reach out to the RSMs. Please also speak with manufacturers and be guided by someone who has better knowledge about how to achieve proper levels of bullet resistance. However, also remember that if you have a very good door and you want to add bullet resistance to it, it's possible. But if you have a poor wall around it, you haven't achieved much, okay? So like Dov has been saying time and time again, all of these things are a piece of the puzzle. Make sure you're working towards assembling the full puzzle rather than just putting a Band-Aid on one of the factors here. We generally don't recommend plastic windows and frames for obvious reasons. They're inferior and could be easily compromised, whether or not they're protected. And please remember, there are always options for how you want to protect your facility, what you want to achieve. And I want to return to a comment I made earlier. Please remember that if you sit down and you have some sense of agreement with your team as to how you want to protect your facility, what features do you want to achieve, and what would make sense, and the team within your organization has come to some sort of a common understanding, that is the time when you can start sharing your needs with JCRC, with manufacturers, with vendors. Because if there's no internal agreement, right, I'll show up, no problem. Any one of us will show up. But we've seen several examples recently where we have a conversation with several people at a facility, and all of a sudden we pick up on the vibe that they actually don't agree internally. So why are we having conversation? First, decide what it is that you want, agree on it, even if it's very simple, okay? Then begin your conversations with external parties. So, but options do exist, okay? Just want to close on that. I don't think I have any further slides, so I'm passing it back to Dov. Thank you.
First of all, like we've said every week, we're noticing one of the reasons we started this was noticing not only the gaps on following the procurement rules from DHSES, from the feds, was the gaps on installation, product selection, etc. Film was one of those specific areas, as you've heard Ilya mention again and again, that window film, the different types that are out there, that they just have not been installed correctly. I mean, there's even different brands, right? So you have to even decide amongst which one that you're comfortable with, and we're not here to say this one or that one, but we can help you understand the specifications. And if you put out a real RFP package, you now can get back, okay, well, we're giving you 3M 20 millimeter film that can do this type of blast resistance, forced entry resistance. You kind of now know what you're talking about, instead of, we have 20 windows, we need film. What's film? So it helps. And like Ilya said, there's so many options. There's the blast curtain. Sometimes you actually might have to replace the whole window and the whole glass frame, the glass itself. Not all glass can be filmed. The stained glass setup, you can't film that. You might have to put a secondary barrier on the inside. It's also important to recognize that what's on the other side of this glass. Sometimes we're just going crazy and putting film everywhere, when we can be smarter about our installation. That goes for any security upgrades we do. Let's think about it. And that's what Ilya was saying. And that's what we've been saying every week. Step back when you make your RFP, when you start deciding what you want. You need to know what your end goals are. What is the result of what we're trying to achieve here, so that we can actually design the right program, the right product, the right install. It's actually one of my favorite parts. It's one thing to put a great lock in, but if we haven't figured out a way to operationalize entering and exiting every day, that it's actually secured and protecting us, what have we done? If we've put in film that we think is going to help us against blast, that is not anchored like Ilya was explaining, there's actually a couple different ways to anchor it, and we always advise according to manufacturers' recommendations. What have we really done? And we see this a lot, unfortunately, especially with film. So make sure you're doing your homework, you're working with your team, you know what you want. Another thing I wanted to point out also is, as we recognize the limitations in our understanding, is our team, the CSI team, has started upgrading our assessments to what it explains about what the rec should be. Now, it doesn't get nitty gritty and detail out the cabling of a camera system, but we're starting to put in there some of the most high level criteria, from the megapixels of your camera and storage to film specs. So definitely refer back to your assessment. And I like a phrase to put out there called hardware supports your policy. All this stuff, if you don't know what you want to do with it, what will it achieve? So just be thinking with your team, with your committee, with everyone who's involved, what you're really trying to do here. We still have David Klein on the line if anyone wants to ask questions about that. The Shabbos locks, again, an option. There's multiple ways that we can always increase security and figure out a way around our problem, around the questions and issues we have with our security designs. And I want to, if those of you who have not met our threat intelligence analyst, Rebecca Fetterman, she's going to run our Q&A today. As you know, CSI is doing a lot of things. You've probably been on a couple other webinars. One of the big things that this team does is, besides just the RSMs out in the field, there's a lot of work happening behind the scenes. And I think we got one of the best out there, partnering with other agencies, Rebecca Fetterman, our threat intelligence analyst. So we got David Klein up here if there's any questions about his company's Shabbos locks, and we're ready to go.
All right. So I am going to ask the first question while we still have David Klein here. So Shabbat locks have to be where the cylinder is located, correct?
Well, typically, yes, but we can also customize locks that can replace the location of the existing cylinder, surface mount something on the door, and move to a different location on the door. But typically, we try to keep the integrity of the door the way it was built and use the existing cylinders. So basically, you'll take the cylinder you have in your door out, put our locks in the door, and reuse your cylinder in our locks.
Thank you so much for that answer. And that is the last doors question I have. So we are going to move on to windows. But if anyone does have a last minute doors question, feel free to pop it in the chat and we can go back to it. Okay. If we are willing to replace windows, are there windows to consider rather than retrofitting with film or buying new with film, i.e., are there bullet resistant windows?
So bullet resistant windows are custom made. So that is a fairly, it's an involved process. I'm just trying to pick my words carefully here. The window frames and windows that we typically recommend should be made of metal and not aluminum. So we stand by previous recommendations as we talked about doors, right? We want windows to be as sturdy as possible. So talk to the vendors, not vendors, but manufacturers. If you're replacing, find out what brand you're looking for, what brands are available, how are they constructed, fabricated, how are they attached to the window opening, right, to the wall. And so you want to dictate that attachment, and the materials used besides glass would have to be of sturdy construction. And I would refer you back to some of the standards that are out there, but begin your conversation with manufacturers. They may be able to guide you in the right direction right away and just kind of parse through a lot of very technical information. If you're stuck, please, you always know that you can reach out to JCRC's team and the RSMs, and we'll help give you some additional guidance. So in general, I would recommend to be careful and not think about that you're going to make all of your windows bullet resistant. Because really, the application of bullet resistance is very specific. You have to think in terms of where is your population? What are you protecting? Are you putting a bullet resistant glass on a one-person office? Is that what we're doing? So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying you have to really understand what is the pedestrian circulation heat map of your building. Okay, where are people congregating? Where are they going? What are you designating as your shelter-in-place locations if you haven't already, right? Where would be those heat zones, the high concentration heat zones where you want to reinforce to the bullet resistant standard? And then someone would have to really take a look at what you have in place today to decide, do you need to replace all the windows completely to the frame, right? Or do you retrofit in place? So that is a slightly more involved conversation. I apologize, I'm not able to, it would take several hours and me trying to ask a ton more questions to just understand your specific situation. Please reach out to us offline. Dov has a hand up.
Yeah, and if I can add, just like we talked about the operationality, right? The operations, the usage of any of these systems. What is the biggest threat we're worried about if we're going through a window hardening program, right? So if we just came off doors, right? What was the point of our whole door segment is understanding that ability for a bad guy to break through and to stall them and delay them. I think the threat of a forced entry is almost more than the threat of a blast or the threat of a ballistic protection, right? Obviously, each bullet protection aside, but a good forced entry protection film will help with somewhat of that film. But again, if it's not anchored right, you'll just kick that through out of the frame the same way it can be blasted out from the frame. So it's again, like as we think about these programs are doing, what are we trying to achieve? And just like Ilya was saying, where's that threat population behind you, behind a certain window? Also, if there's the threat outside, can you move people now away from there? That could be it's a very realistic solution than just waiting on a window to protect us, because eventually the bullets will start coming through without that response quick enough. And even so, I'll end on this comment. I haven't really seen a lot of bullet resistant films. It's mostly, like Ilya's been saying, a glass replacement, specially designed for this criteria. Films that do this, I've heard people talk about it. I haven't seen it. I don't know if that really exists. So like Ilya always says, do your homework. Look at those manufacturers.
Next question. Can the film sealing, can it be applied retroactively, or do you have to do a whole replacement of the window and new film?
No, film can be applied to an existing window. It's a fairly easy and fast installation if the contractor knows what they're doing. So no need to replace glass, but you should be aware of the general sturdiness of both the glass that you have and also the window frame. Because like I said, you could put a fairly robust film on the glass, but the glass could be of very poor quality. And then some older facilities, that's the case. And the frame could be deteriorated beyond repair. So why spend the money, So just again, you got to look at your individual situation. Please reach out to us if any questions arise. Dov.
And our RSMs, right, the regional security managers have started adding language into our assessments. And when they work with you on specification design, don't let the vendor say, oh, that's an extra charge for your anchoring system, whatever the options are. There's some anchoring options that are better than others, right? They wrap the whole glass within the frame, or do they just use a sealant or a bead? But that's part of your bid specs, is that this is a requirement of this installation. Be clear there. You don't want to find out later, oh, that's an extra whatever charge, when you've used up your grant funds and you have the project finished.
Just a quick follow-up. If your window has been sealed with film, but you found upon inspection that it's not enough, can you modify the existing film, or do you have to then do a replace?
Would have to replace, because what's happening is you're adding a layer that I suppose, let's say, hasn't been installed properly or it hasn't been anchored. That film would have to be taken off and a new film applied. I've yet to see an installation where a new film has been applied to an existing film. It doesn't really work from my perspective.
And then another film related question. So if an institution's windows are either wood or painted metal, the silicone seal cannot be applied. If they've been told in the past that some film can protect even if it's not attached to the frame, is that accurate or inaccurate information?
Considering my experience, and I'm speaking from what I have observed in the field and what we've specified, I have not seen film that is effective that's not anchored to the frame.
Ilya, it might be a good idea to ask your vendor for the manufacturer's specifications.
Exactly.
That show that it's effective without being attached. Ilya and I can't think of a case where it would be effective, but ask the vendor to give you the manufacturer's spec. Also,
I'll go one step beyond what David said, and I appreciate you clarifying that. Contractors in general don't like to certify anything because it's a liability issue, right? So ask them for a certification letter. Tell them, I want a certification, give it to me. I want you to certify that this product, because once they certify, they carry the liability, okay? You could go after them and bankrupt the company. And I've seen this done. Okay. Now, I'm not suggesting that you become so dangerous to them, or you should be nice to any integrators that work with you. At the end of the day, make sure that they give you a confirmation. This is a product, it works, or it's backed by a certain standard, whatever that may be. Just do a couple more steps before you just agree.
By the way, in New York State, the only film that is approved by the Office of General Services is 3M. And one of the reasons they recommend 3M, or they only use 3M, is that 3M itself warranties both the film and the installation. And they have a rigorous program training dealers. Anyone can kind of put up contact paper on the windows, and it doesn't mean that that's a installation that's going to get you anywhere.
And just to clarify even a little further, if their vendor's telling you that this will provide forced entry protection, yeah, someone took a bat to the glass, it won't shatter right away. It'll withstand that impact. Yeah, it could do that. But again, they're going to kick it right out of the...
By the way, the other thing that the film does is it properly installed film does prevent illegal entry. Just think January 6th. If you look at any of the videos from January 6th, the entire pane of glass came out of the frame. The window shattered, but it was held together by film. I don't know, the Capitol architect should be held for malpractice because there were clearly no attachment systems. And on January 6th, I was screaming at my TV, where are the attachment systems?
And again, let's not forget, anything's only for a few minutes, right? So there's always an ability at some point, right? That's why we still need our response plans. We still need law enforcement to be contacted and coming. We still need to have our layers internally if that's the plan. So let's not forget the puzzle. Let's not forget the puzzle. And another point that Ilya says every week is we don't want to enable this false sense of security. Right? If we've done these systems, we had the vendor do it, but we didn't do all the pieces. We're not, and I think we're sitting behind this glass with a little couple millimeters of a film, and we think we've moved the needle all the way. Let's think the complete puzzle.
We have a few more really quick sort of yes or no answers. So I'm going to ask them. If you change a window, can you repurpose the film?
Not likely.
Not likely. Great. Next one. Can stained glass be protected from the outside?
Can, but you would require, again, an involved installation. Dove mentioned it actually, that we have seen where bullet resistant panels are installed generally on the inside, but on the outside, it's possible, conceivably. But again, we'd have to look at your specific project. Please don't just settle on that one idea. Okay, you really, to Dove's point, to David's point, you really need to look at the larger level of threat. Why are you doing it, right? What are you protecting and when? And whether there are other options. So in this particular situation, I would say general rule would be consider at least 3 options. What are they? If you don't have the other 2 and you just have one, please pause and find what other options are out there.
But unlikely a film application can be used on stained glass.
Oh, it's impossible. I can tell you right now, not possible. You'll need another pane of glass behind on which you can apply. But typically, what are we seeing in facilities? Stained glass goes from floor to ceiling. It's like, however many feet, right? Let's say could be up to, 10 feet tall. So you really have to understand what are you reinforcing, how you're doing it, the constructability of that protection method. So there's a lot more that needs to be considered.
I've heard of a synagogue that has been one of Ilya's clients, but not lately. They want window film, and I sent them to a number of dealers, and a number of dealers told them they couldn't use window film. These are really good technicians, and they know what they can do, and they're not afraid to turn away business. The synagogue said, "Oh, we found someone to do this." I saw who they're using, and what do these people know about window film and security? And well, the people who are doing our doors recommended this contractor. So there will always be someone to take your money.
Is it practical to install film on single pane glass?
It's practical, but the question is, again, what is your specific window construction? Single pane glass, I've seen this applied. We would have to understand how thick that pane of glass is. But I've showed you, even with door applications, when, let's say, those doors that have large glass panes, in general, those are single panes, right? And so that can be retrofitted. But again, we really need to take a look at how thick that glass is, whether it's even prudent to apply film to that pane, whether it's going to withstand the attack. So there's going to be a question to the manufacturer, who will have to assess and then give you their consideration. In many ways, in many cases, you can ask the manufacturer to even write you a letter. They may send somebody to take a look at it, and then they will give you a letter to say, okay, in order to achieve this, here's what you would need to do if you're retrofitting. If you're willing to replace, they'll give you options for replacement.
What constitutes a window? Is it the whole frame, or is it each frame glass surface?
A window has a glass pane. A window itself is primarily the frame that is attached to the wall, and then the leaf. Typically, they're solid wood or metal leaf that swings if it swings in whatever direction, right? And then typically a window will have a glass pane inserted in that leaf. So that is the way that I typically see how it's discussed. So I hope I answered that question. I don't know. Did I? Rebecca, what do you think?
I think so.
All right, cool.
If you use grant money to put film on old windows and then you upgrade your windows at a future date, can you ask for money for film again for new windows in the future?
David, I want to
a new vulnerability exists. You need to have the new vulnerability reflected in your vulnerability assessment, and then it's fundable.
Unless you're asking for a hate crimes grant again, which we talked about in the beginning of these webinars. Right? We all know you're only eligible for one hate crimes grant per building. If you get awarded NSGP again, like David said, if the vulnerability still exists there, but at that point, you have the option to also look at the windows themselves that you're installing, right? Can you look at a more upgraded window in the first place that the whole attachment system will work better on versus the single pane glass that Ilya was just talking about? That's a good time to start thinking about all the pieces.
Thanks, Dove. And then if an institution would like a list of bullet resistant panel dealers, manufacturers, et cetera, do we have a list of some sort, or do they work directly with you? Send an email to our security inbox? What's the best practice there?
So I apologize. Let me just jump in for a second. I always recommend that manufacturers have a very good sense of who the dealers are, who the capable, trained installers are in your specific geographic area. Now, let me also preface it that even government agencies will have their lists on their websites, and they will say, "Oh, these are the either manufacturers or vendors that we use." I typically like starting that conversation with manufacturers, if you at least know of a couple, right? And then let them tell you who their dealer networks are.
So as an example, I'm going to wake up David Klein, who's a manufacturer. I've asked David and other people at SecureTech, who are the good door installers?
They're out there.
That's how we do it. So that if David wants to sell locks and doors that they manufacture, they have to work with people who can really do a good job and an effective job creating a secure door.
And as it was said about the training, basically anybody who installs our locks has been trained by SecureTech. We don't just sell locks and let anybody just throw it into the door, because some of these, have special applications and you want to make sure that everything is taken care of. So we have certified dealers and installers basically around the country that we have trained. And we do free training. If there's a facility that has their own maintenance staff and wants to learn, we will train. We don't charge for that. We want everybody to know how to put our locks in properly.
And that ties back in so perfectly with what Ilya's been saying over the last few weeks and what we've been saying about doing your homework, looking at the manufacturers. They should be able to lead you, just like David Klein just explained, how if they want their products to work right in the field and get that reputation, they're going to care about who their installers are. We at JCRC, as we've said multiple times, we can't refer any vendors. We have to be careful and try to stay away from that. But again, we can definitely help distribute your advertisements. So when you're at that stage, we didn't talk about procurement rules. We've had so much information to talk about today. Watch those earlier sessions. Make sure we're following the procurement rules. Once you're up for the advertisement stage, which pretty much most of you are required to do, send your advertisement, a clip from the newspaper, to your regional security manager, and we can help distribute it and stay out of the process to make sure that it is shared with some reputable vendors. But again, we don't have a reference list that we can provide. And also remember, if we didn't get to your questions today here, you have CSI_questions@jcrcny.org, which will always get you to your RSM or your question funnel in the right direction.
And with that, as he said, send any additional questions that you think of or that we may not have thought of to the email address that Seth just put in the chat.
Thank you, Rebecca. No, it's great to have you. We like it. It's a big team over at CSI. Thank you to David Pollack and Mitch Silber, who have really put this team together and the amazing things they do. Ilya and I are glad to be able to support it and to support the community. Thank you, David Klein and SecureTech for assisting us today and talking to our group here. Thank you. Definitely. So we just want people to realize there's solutions out there. Let's think about it. Let's understand what we're trying to accomplish. Thank you to Ilya. Thank you to Seth behind the scenes, Seth Goodstein, the regional security manager for Queens. I'm sure everyone in Queens is familiar with him. So with that, thank you very much. Feel free to reach out anytime. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Take care.